Now, one of our guests of the day, Aisha, used to be an advisor to the Labour leader Ed Miliband, so she'll be interested in the apparent changing political landscape since last year's general election and the recent local council election results. It seems more than 1 million Labour voters have moved out of London in recent years and into traditional Conservative constituencies. But it's not all good news for the party. In order to win the next election, Labour need to win seats in towns in the Midlands, where the Tories have just gained council seats. Our reporter Elizabeth Glinker explains.
When it comes to politics, there are certain things we assume to be true. The leafy home counties will always vote Conservative. The industrial towns in the Midlands and the north of England will vote Labour. But in a post-Brexit world, some analysts think that could be starting to change. In the last 4 years, more than 1 million people moved out of London. Some London leavers moved to cities like Birmingham and Leeds, but around 2/3 moved to the counties surrounding the capital, where the Conservatives are traditionally dominant. The suggestion is that these voters, who are disproportionately young, well off, and might have traditionally been expected to vote blue, could be sowing the seeds of change.
There are many areas in the southeast and in the home counties that traditionally we'd expect to be solid Conservative seats. However, in recent years, they've seen an influx of young people from London, a high number of graduates and people that voted Remain in the EU referendum. That means that in the long run, these are areas that the Conservatives should probably be concerned about losing to the Labour Party.
In the 2017 general election, Labour increased its share of the vote by 10% in the east and southeast of England, just as the Conservatives lost seats in places like Canterbury, Bedford and Reading. A YouGov poll of 25,000 recent London leavers found 66% were Remain voters, which in turn had influenced their decision to vote Labour in recent elections. It means that over time, those true blue home counties are becoming that little bit more like London. So, should the Conservatives be worried? Well, at the same time, in other parts of the country, the converse seems to be true. Areas like Mansfield, Walsall North and Stoke South, which voted overwhelmingly to leave in the EU referendum, flipped from red to blue in 2017. This trend was reinforced by the recent local election results, with the Conservatives winning in places like Nuneaton, Derby, Dudley and Walsall.
There is a very live debate within the Labour Party about whether, because Labour is doing so well in cities, that we ought to focus our energies there and make sure that we speak for that younger, liberal demographic in cities. But the truth is that would not only be a breach of our moral responsibility to many people in this country and a great break with our history, it would also be a dead end for us electorally.
For the first time in nearly a decade, the most recent electoral test, this month's local elections, did not deliver a lightning bolt. But that doesn't necessarily mean that normal service has been resumed.
Glinker there. Well, let's talk political landscapes, changing if they are, with the Conservative MP Neil O'Brien. My other guests obviously are still here in the studio. What does your party, the Conservative Party, need to do to improve its chances in cities like London?
Well, I think there's a few different things we've got to do. First, we've got to keep going with the strong economic record that we've got, where we've brought down unemployment, got more people in work than ever before. And then secondly, as we move out of the time when we've been having to clear up Labour's massive deficit, the biggest deficit since the Second World War,
yes,
we can start to... I know it sounds boring, but that's
not
what we've
boring,
had to do.
it's just that it's quite a long time ago.
It's what we've had to do, and it's because it's such a big deficit, the government borrowing a quarter of all the money it was spending when we came in. But as we move out of that, we can have a more positive time, and I think it will be a time where we can start to invest more in the NHS, to have stronger growth in the public services, and to have that mix of strong public services and under control taxes that I think most people in this want,
well,
rather than a kind of lurch off to the left.
You've had that message for quite a long time, haven't you, Neil, in terms of your economic message, and it hasn't worked, not in London. It hasn't gained traction. So I put it to you, is that because, in part, the mantra Brexit means Brexit, appealing perhaps to a more Leave audience, is not going to endear yourself to what is seen as a very Remain city?
Well, I think there's two things to say about that. The first is we've got to respect the result of the referendum. I'm an MP in the Midlands, and you just talked in the video you showed about the number of seats that we won up in the Midlands, and all the people in my constituency want to see that result respected. But on the other hand, we do have to also deliver a Brexit that works for the 48% of people that didn't vote to leave. And that's why the Prime Minister is going for a smooth, orderly Brexit that also works for business and keeps trade flowing. And that's what we need to do on Brexit. But we need to do a lot more than just Brexit. We need to show that we are a party that is comfortable with modern Britain, that celebrates some of the good things that migration has brought to this country, and some of the people have come here and built businesses, like in my constituency, which is on the edge of one of Britain's most diverse cities. So it's a matter of getting the turn right. We do need that economic message, and we haven't, I think, talked enough about the progress we've made. But we do also need to show that culturally we are, as well as investing in the big public services, comfortable with contemporary Britain.
Is there also a problem, though, demographically for the Conservatives in terms of age? Because the maxim that, you vote Labour when you're young and then you vote Tory when you're older, heart and head sort of thing, that is still in play, isn't it, if you look at the statistics? And you're not going to be able to win a majority unless you address that.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. So in one way, the country's become a lot less polarised. I mean, we had our best share of the vote among working class people that we've had since 1979. So on class grounds, we've got less divided, but on age grounds, we've got more divided. And that's why we need to do big things on housing. And I'm very glad that we're reviewing what we've done on tuition fees. And we need to come up with some big things to help young people get on in life. And I think that's one of the big challenges as part of the new think tank that I'm setting up that we're going to be looking at.
Well, Neil's got a point, hasn't he, when it comes to working class voters? Are the Tories now becoming the party of the working class, not Labour?
No, I wouldn't go as far as saying that, but I think what we saw at the last set of local elections is that we're sort of stuck. Britain's in political stalemate at the moment. We haven't really moved on that much from the general election. The study that John Curtis did for the BBC showed that if there was a general election based on the local election results, Labour would actually be the largest party but wouldn't have enough to form a sort of coalition government. So my analysis of it, still doing a lot of stuff with the Labour Party, but being quite critical of the leadership is, I think you have the Labour Party becoming the party of the younger voters, metropolitan voters, educated with a lot of students as well. The Conservatives appealing heavily to those former UKIP areas, Leave areas, older voters, rural areas, those shire towns as well. And I think what's going to become really interesting at the next general election is actually, if it continues like this, Scotland may well swing what happens in terms of who becomes Prime Minister.
Well, that is important, obviously, for everybody, particularly in terms of the Labour Party and what has happened. You work with students, obviously, an awful lot. Do you think that does still hold, that psychologically students are more left-leaning at that age, and then when they get older and when they get a job, or,
I don't know if it's because of their heart exactly. It might be because they're not very happy at being at the bottom of the hierarchy. But they are there primarily because they're young. But I also think that the Conservatives have an opportunity to appeal to young people by appealing to elements of psychological well-being, let's say, that aren't normally addressed in the political realm. So I think young people are very hungry now, especially the youngest of the young, for a message of personal responsibility and the freedom to make their way in the world, and support and encouragement for that. And I've seen that start to happen among the Conservatives in Canada to fair good effect. So, and it's not easy for Conservatives to deliver a message to the young, but I think one of opening up opportunities for them to live the kind of life they want to live if they're going to take responsibility.
Well, hang on, all one at a time. Neil first, then I'll come to you, Aisha.
I think Jordan is right about that, actually, and I've started to notice some younger people coming into the Conservatives in my own constituency, and the shine is definitely coming off Jeremy Corbyn, particularly having done things like said, I'll get rid of all your student debts, and then saying straight after the general election, oh no, actually we can't do it, we'd never worked out how much it would cost. I mean, that's ridiculous. If you had a bit more of a mainstream leader, I think we would be in more trouble, but I think ultimately people are not going to go for Jeremy Corbyn, but that doesn't mean that over the longer term, we as a party don't have a challenge.
Right, let's just be careful with our language, because Jeremy Corbyn didn't say, I'll get rid of all your debts.
That's what he said right on the front of the NME. That is exactly what he said.
Those weren't the words he used.
I will deal with it.
You've interpreted it that way. Yes, Aisha.
I would probably push back a wee bit on what Jordan said, because I think one of the things that we saw in the last general election campaign about what motivates young people is not just stuff for themselves. They also have a great concern for things like the environment and public services, the health service, and also how we treat people. What are our values in society about being an inclusive society, a tolerant society? I know you hate identity politics, but that actually, matters to quite a lot of young people. And I think
that's because they haven't been told a better story than that.
Well,
yet.
I think they feel what they do in their heart at that time, and they want to be sort of kind and inclusive. But I think the struggle, I would say that the two policy areas which you have touched upon, which unless the Conservatives get some movement on, housing and debt, student debt, is such a big issue for people. And I think particularly on housing, which I think, to be fair, no political party has quite cracked what the solution is. But the idea that you say to, a generation, and this is where the capitalism argument is coming into, how can you say to a younger generation, be wedded to capitalism when they have no capital and they have no means of acquiring capital?
I actually agree with a lot of that. And on the environment, I think it's been really impressive the way Michael Gove has taken that issue and run with it. He's banning plastic waste and stopping on the litter accruing in our oceans and our streets. So I think that's an important start. But I agree with you about the housing point. And we need to, as well as being able to build enough housing, we also need to think about the balance between the rented sector and ownership, and maybe use the tax system to change that balance a bit. So I actually agree with you there.
Just finally, Jordan, you say that actually students and young people haven't heard a better story than the one that they have been fed, it seems, up until now. But actually, if you're looking at the parties, Labour and the Conservatives here, and let's say Democrats and Republicans in America, how do parties tailor a message that has to bridge a lot of different groups in order to win an election outright, in order to get a majority that is needed here, without actually having to perhaps tone down some of their core messages?
Well, I do think from my experience talking to young people in droves over the last 2 years, I think that the best tack for the Conservatives is to indicate their willingness to open up the economic forum to genuine progress for young people and to have them play a part in that. Part of the reason that the leftists are attractive to young people is because they feel that the system is actually stacked against them in a fair competition. And unreasonable housing prices certainly play into that, and unreasonable levels of student debt as well.
But why should they have a stake in capitalism when they have no capital?
Well, because they're not going to be young forever. And one of the best predictors of whether or not you have capital is how old you are. So most of the people that are rich are old. And you basically trade in your youth across your life for age.
You don't naturally accrue wealth if you don't start with something just because you get older. So
we now have start with lots of things that aren't merely capital.
But we now have a situation where people are still having to live with their parents into their sort of 30s and 40s because they can't get the money together for a deposit. So
I think there's also, we started by talking about our cities, and that's a really important point. I think initiatives like the Northern Powerhouse, the Midlands Engine have been really important in terms of regenerating those big, great cities.
Although I would just come in there and say that the cuts to local councils in some of these areas have been incredibly sort of damaging to the communities as well.
Neil, I'm afraid we're going to have to end it there, but thank you very much for coming in.